we'll try this again. Okay, today is the 9th of June, 2009. We are at the Isaac C. Griswold Public Library in Whitehall, New York. My name is Wayne Clark. I'm at the New York State Military Museum, and we are interviewing Mr. Manuele this morning. Sir, for the record, would you please state your full name and your date and place of birth, please?
I'm Alex J. Manuele. My date of birth is January 22nd, 1923, and I was born in Cadiz, Ohio.
Okay, did you attend school there?
No, I was born in Cadiz, Ohio. Before I was 2 years old, my family moved to West Virginia, and where two of my two younger brothers were born, and then we moved to Pennsylvania. And from Pennsylvania, when I was 7 years old, we moved here to Whitehall.
Okay.
The occasion of the movement was my father was a well driller, a quarry driller, and it was the middle of the Depression. There was no work in Pennsylvania. The man he worked for some strange reason, was able to secure a contract to provide the crushed stones for the new highway that was being built between Fort Anne and Whitehall. So he moved his family up here, and he had worked for 2.5 years, but then they had 2.5 years, there was no work left.
All right. Did you attend school here in Whitehall?
I went to the first grade in Burgettstown, Pennsylvania, and then I went to the rest of the school years up through high school in Whitehall.
And you graduated from high school?
I graduated from Whitehall High School.
And what year did you graduate?
1941.
And at that point, did you go to work or did you go into the service?
I went to work. I moved to Rome, New York to help them build the Griffith Air Force Base, which just in the process, the Air Force needed more capacity than they had at the time. And in 1942, I decided it was time to enter military service.
All right. Do you remember where you were when you heard about Pearl Harbor, and what was your reaction at that point?
No, I don't remember where I was.
Okay. All right. So you went into the service in 1942.
Yes.
Did you enlist or were you drafted?
Well, it was September in 1942. I decided it was time for me to enter the service. So I took a Saturday and I asked somebody, where do you go to enlist? So they said it's on the second floor of the post office in Rome, New York, where I was living. So on this Saturday, I went to the post office, went to the second floor, and there were 5 officers there: Army, Navy, Air Force, Seabees, and 1 open door. The first 4 doors were closed with signs out to lunch. And then the 5th door was open. Then there's just this handsome young man with a khaki shirt and this most beautiful pair of blue pants I've ever seen, with a gold stripe down the side. And this was the Marine Corps recruiter. And that's the reason I entered the Marine Corps, because he was the only one there to take me.
All right. And had you had anyone else in the family that had been in the service?
We had my brother, older brother Joe, was already in the Army Air Force.
All right. Now, where did you go for your basic training?
Now, just a moment. See, this was September. The man said, we're full right now. We'll let you know when we need you. And they waited until December. On December 3rd or 4th, they said, show up at the Utica train station at 9 o'clock on the morning of December 9th, and you will be a Marine. And I went to the train station in Utica and took the train to Parris Island, South Carolina, and I was a Marine for the next 3 years, lacking 4 days.
Was that your first time away from home for an extended period?
Yes.
And what was basic training like?
Basic training was, I suppose, typical of all boots, what they call a young Marine, the boots. One of the crazy things, they took you through the general thing. They cut your hair, they give you a physical, they check your teeth. As a matter of fact, I had 17 fillings put into my mouth in one day.
17?
17 fillings, and I have most of them. That's how it did such a good job. I still have most of those fillings. And so that came that time where they said, all right, we're going to find out how smart you are. And I think there must have been 200 people in this one room with the airphone taking the intelligence test. And 3 days later, the drill instructor called me to his tent and he said, you should sign up for officers training. And I said, why? He said, well, you know, you had a score of 139. He said, we only had one person in this group with that high score. So he said, do you have 2 years of math? And I said, I'm afraid not. And I could backtrack on that if you want me to.
Mm-hmm.
See, when I was 14 years old, I had graduated as valedictorian of the 8th grade. 2 months later, when it came to enter high school, they had these people all lined up to set up their courses for high school, and there are 2 people sitting behind it, had 2 teachers whose names I choose not to mention right now. The first question they asked me was, do you expect to go to college? Now, it was the middle of the Depression. My father had been out of work for 1.5 years, and I said, I don't think so. And they just very flippantly said, put him in a commercial course. So I spent my high school days taking things like bookkeeping and typing and salesmanship and so forth, while my other confreres were taking geometry and algebra and trigonometry and biology and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't go to officers training school. The next day, can I tell this?
Sure.
The next day, they said, we're going to take another test. So the guy must have been 50 people in the room, put headphones on. And they said, now you're going to listen to 2 sounds. They're either going to be the same or they're going to be different. And in my earphones, I hear the thing, deep, 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 and that's the voices. Now you see, those are different. Now listen to these 2. Then I can remember with the letter K, deep, 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 deep. Now those are the same. Now we're going to give you a list of 2 sounds, and there must have been 100 of them. You mark whether they're the same or whether they're different. And when I got through that, they said, you aced it. But I found out 2 years later the reason I aced it is because almost most people who were musically inclined got those things down pat.
Mm-hmm.
So I heard nothing more about this until the end of the 9-week course of a boot camp where we were going to be assigned to some place. They said, Manuele, you're going to Texas A&M. Why? You're going to radio school. We went to a beautiful campus down there in Texas, and we sat there and learned to take Morse code.
Mm-hmm.
Now, they had a system there, and see, we were privates. If you were able to listen to and transcribe 26 words a minute, you got a stripe on your line. You became a private first class. If you were able to hear and transcribe 28 words a minute, you got 2 stripes. You became a corporal. Well, there were 2 of us that were able to transcribe 28 words a minute.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, and then I heard somebody say later, is that fellow a musician? They said, yes. They said, well, the people who score higher are people who just have that thing, that
Mm-hmm.
that auditory just thingy thing. And so I graduated out of there, out of Texas. So they sent me to a Marine Air Corps installation where they didn't have a key.
Mm-hmm.
They had no use for me there. So one of those strange things that happen in the military, you know, somebody sent to the wrong place, but it's nobody's fault, you see. So I hung around that base, and I got transferred to a fighter outfit. They didn't have a key. And so this one day, I went past the commander's office, and they had a bulletin board out there, a new piece of paper that said, wanted volunteers to train as Navigator Bombardiers. Now, you see, most planes have a pilot, a co-pilot, a navigator with his maps, and a bombardier who sat up in the front of the plane. But the Marine Corps was going to have taken over, used, and rejected B-25 planes from the Navy. And decided they wanted to have a bombing group. Well, there wasn't room in the B-25 for a pilot, a co-pilot, a navigator, and a bombardier. So they had to combine the navigator and bombardier functions into one person. So I signed up for it, and I was sent to Quantico. It's a beautiful place to be because it was just about 12 miles away from Washington, D.C., and there was girls galore, and there were nightclubs and all kinds of stuff. I finished there, and I was sent back to Parris Island, where a group was preparing to go overseas. And I became the bombardier for plane marked Mike Baker 8.
Now let me ask you something.
Yeah, sure.
In the Army Air Corps, either a bombardier or navigator would be an officer.
That's right.
Were you an
I
officer?
was not an officer. We tried for 6 months to get the officer status, but no, two
Mhm.
officers in a plane is enough.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
All right. So after the training there, it became time for us to travel west, so we got into our planes and hopped from, I can remember the first stop was New Orleans, where we laid over for almost 10 or 12 hours, and then headed to San Diego, which is, of course, you see the Marine Corps, part of the Navy, something in San Diego, California. And we got there, and we found out that there was no place for us out in the Pacific yet. It seems that practically every Marine Corps base in the Pacific or Navy base was occupied by some military group. So we hung around San Diego 9 weeks, I believe, 9 weeks. So finally they said they found a place. Now, again, you see we're flying B-25s. Average airspeed, 250 miles an hour. At 250 miles an hour, we could fly 3 hours and 15 minutes. If we upped the speed to 280 miles an hour, we lowered that down to 250 miles because of the extra use of fuel. We didn't have enough fuel in our tanks to fly from California to the Hawaiian Islands. So the Navy had many carriers. Carriers had no other function except to put planes on them and take them from one place to another, then where they can get them off there. So we are, finally this one day had these planes put onto the carrier, and we went onto the carrier with them, slipped downstairs and took off to Hawaii. When we got to Hawaii, they still didn't have a place for us. So we went through a 5-week training period there, and mostly having to do with survival, jungle survival. What do you do if you're in there all by yourself? How do you eat? How do you drink? How do you do this? They taught us the kind of berries you could eat, the kind of roots you could eat. Certain fruits were poison and stuff like this. In the meantime, you see, our planes only carried 5 people. Pilot, co-pilot, navigator, radio man, and tail gunner. The entire ground crew was on a ship named the Zoea Likes, and they had taken off from California at the same time we did, but they had no place to go. Again, you see, there was no base for them to go, and so they wandered around the Pacific for something like 8 months with their gears down in the hold, never being taken out. Finally, they found a little island way out in the middle of the Pacific. God knows, this is so far away from everything, named Emiru, E-M-I-R-A-U, and there was a strip there. There was a small Australian squadron there, but there was room for us there. So we island hopped from Hawaii to Palmyra, which is almost directly south, 780 miles. Then traveled west from island to island till we got to this little island of Emiru. And we spent most of our time doing night bombing on Japanese installations. And actually, you see, the archipelago, there's little tiny islands all over the Japanese have taken over places and put different installations. And that's what we did there. Now, apparently, the hierarchy had decided that we had done enough there by that time. So they reassigned us to Zamboanga. Zamboanga is the very, very southern tip of the Philippine Islands. We flew to Zamboanga, and we did the same thing there that we had done out of Emiru, flying. These were daytime flights, bombing Japanese targets on the various parts of the Philippine Islands.
Did you run into any sort of resistance?
At one time, I saw bombs go off out there beyond my plane. At one time, when we got back, I found that there was a little hole in the plexiglass just about ahead and to the left of me. And there was another one behind me here, and I realized a piece of that shrapnel had gone through the plane. But I didn't realize that there was so much noise, especially with the machine guns going. The pilot had the machine gun up in the front, but the triggers were back in the pilot's compartment. That's the only time I ever came what I thought was close to enemy activity. And the war finished. But I realized then, when the war finishes, you don't just go home. There are certain administrative jobs that have to be done. There's all this book work and all the paperwork that had to be done. So they let the word out. They said, you know, the quicker we get this done, the quicker we can go home. Who can type? Well, I think everybody on the crew knew how to type. So the next thing we were doing, getting insurance forms and everything ready to send home. See?
Mm-hmm.
In the meantime, here were these millions and millions of dollars worth of materiel, trucks, planes, jeeps, all this kind of material. It was never going to be sent back, so we'll just left there in the Philippines, out on the field. Whether it was ever used later by the Philippines, of course, you see, you couldn't use it without gasoline.
Mm-hmm.
So, here we are in December, early December, late November. And the word went out that even though the war was over, the Japanese had surrendered. There were still pockets of Japanese troops out in the hinterlands of China. And the United States felt that they should have a presence there, a military presence in China for a certain amount of time. And that they chose a fighter group that was stationed just north of us in the Philippines to be that presence. Well, fighter plane only had a pilot in it. No navigation equipment except a compass. So they needed navigational help to get those pilots from the Philippines to China. So my, well, I don't know why, but my plane was chosen as the lead plane to navigate them there. Now, it's a little more than 2 hours from the tip of the Philippines down to Zamboanga to the northern coast up in the island of Luzon. So we flew to Luzon, gassed up. Now between Luzon and China, there's only one possible stop, and that is Iwo Jima. Our planes at 250 miles an hour, I said, could fly about 3 hours and 15 minutes. Iwo Jima was 2 hours and 45 minutes. So we had an extra half hour of gas. In the meantime, then we gassed up, took off. In the meantime, over here to my left is the coast of China. So we're talking about 800-900 miles away. Mm-hmm. And on my map, there was indicating there are radio stations here with the call letters for the radio station. And I tried to pick them up. Now, in the meantime, I see in front of my navigation table was a dial about 8 inches across. It was a compass. Mm-hmm. And every time I picked up a radio signal, that needle on the compass would point to wherever that signal was coming from. So I tried these stations in China and I couldn't get anything. In the meantime, I had this map and I was tracking where I was going to go, and I got to this point where I thought, I wonder if I'm close enough to Iwo Jima to at least pick up the station. So I turned over and I remember it was I-O. I-O. I got the station in my earphones, and that needle went like this, and immediately went right back. I thought, oh my God, we just passed it. I tapped the pilot on the shoulder and said, like this. He came down. In the meantime, we had clouds on top, clouds down on the bottom. I couldn't even use the sun to navigate, you see. So we're down through those clouds, and as soon as we circled it, there was Iwo Jima right there. I thought, oh my God, I'm an hour and 10 minutes early. I found out later, once we got down to the station, we had 120 mile an hour tailwind that nobody was able to track. Had I not just at that moment, wondered, can I possibly pick up this radio station? Am I close enough? We would have gone so far that we wouldn't have had enough gas to get back. So we were overnight in Iwo Jima. The next morning, gassed up and took off for China. The airport for Peking, China is in Tientsin. Tientsin became famous here. As a matter of fact, it was in the news the other day about with the pictures of the communist tanks and man lying down in the middle of the road. It's only about 20 miles from Peking. So we landed there, and as it turned out, the day we landed was the day that the Japanese were formally turning over administration of China back to the Japanese, back to the Americans, and to the Chinese Chiang Kai-shek. And it said later there were about 9 million people in town. And this boulevard, I've never seen anything, a boulevard that probably you could, 20, 30 cars side by side going up into the temple. It was probably the most thrilling thing I've ever seen. So we had our time there. We got back into our planes 2 days later and took back to the Philippines. And then they said, okay, you can go home. So we gassed up our planes and took off and took to those same islands where we used to get to the Philippines. We do the same to get back to Hawaii. And we were there 2 days, and they found a passenger ship that was taking off for California. And we went home. 2 days later, I was discharged on December 4th, 1945.
Where were you discharged from?
Camp Pendleton
Okay.
in California.
All right. And how did you get back home? Did you?
I hitchhiked back
Hitchhiked?
home, believe it or not.
A lot of guys did that.
Well, there was this one of those things, to digress a little bit. As we were getting discharged, we ran in, there were a couple of fellows, of course, the group from our group that went into Hollywood. You see, we were Californians. Yeah, we'd been away, and let's have a couple of days before we decide what we're going to do. There was a young man there that had a friend up in Bakersfield. He said, you know, he wants us to come up there. So we went up there and hung around for a couple of days, and then it became time to go home. And the word came around on the radio that there was a snowstorm so bad that all trains between Chicago and California were mired into snow.
Mm-hmm.
So we would talk about taking a train anyway. So I said goodbye to Mrs. Snakes, and I said, she said, now you're not going to take town. I said, no, I'm going to take the train. Well, I went down the road, took a train, went right back that way, and hitchhiked across the country,
Mm-hmm.
and got home.
Did you have any trouble getting a ride? Being in uniform?
No, as a matter of fact, one of my rides was that fellow wanted me to share the driving. Now, I didn't have a domestic driver's license, but I've been driving a truck around Zamboanga for about 3 months. So I shared the driving, and strangely enough, coming into Albuquerque. Now realize, you see, this is almost 60 years ago. Albuquerque was a street that went this way.
Mm-hmm.
And Highway 1 went right through it like this, so you saw this coming in, and it was just getting nighttime. You see the strip of ice like this, and it came down to the hill, out to the other side of the hill, and that was the end of Albuquerque.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Albuquerque is a very big city now, I understand.
Mm-hmm.
And from town to town, it was right across the country. And I got home.
Now, once you got home, did you make use of the GI Bill or the 5220 club?
Not for 2 years. It took me 2 years before I took advantage of that, and I was talked into going to college. I went to college and got a degree in physical therapy. I went to work in physical therapy, and I found out that by taking that course, I also had gotten enough courses in a business named speech therapy that I was able to get employment. Besides my physical therapy work, I was doing speech therapy too at the same time. And I did both of those until I retired 10, 11 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm 86.
Well, you certainly don't look it. And you stayed in the Whitehall area?
I stayed in the Whitehall area until I went to college. I went to college and then I came back to the Whitehall area.
Mm-hmm.
I was widowed, what was it, 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I was lucky enough to meet this lady right here. And, she and I formed a bond, which is one of the strongest bonds you could find. I'm blessed to have her.
Wonderful.
Now, and but here's the thing. See, I don't really, never really felt that I was under any danger when I was definitely. The only thing is that I didn't like to fly, but that was my job, so I flew anyway. So, must have been 6 or 8 months after I was discharged. I got these things. It's a Distinguished Flying Cross.
Oh, can you hold that up in front of you and I can zoom in on it with the
Sure.
camera? Okay. All right, was there a citation with it?
That's the whole thing, so I want to tell you. You see, beside the Air Medal, I also have 4 Air Medals.
Okay,
And these came in the mail. But you see, these by themselves are not worth anything because you can buy these things in a military supply store. 3 months after these arrived in the mail, the citations arrived, signed by the Commandant of the Marine Corps.
okay. Would you care to read your citation?
Yes, dear Mr. Manuele, I take pleasure in forwarding to you the enclosed permanent citations for the Distinguished Flying Cross and Air Medal with 3 gold stars previously presented you in the name of the President of the United States for heroism and extraordinary and meritorious achievements in aerial flights during operations against enemy Japanese forces in the Bismarck Archipelago and the Philippine Islands areas in 1944 and 1945 with the United States Marine Corps. Be assured of my deep appreciation of your devotion to duty and gallant action which were in keeping with the highest traditions of the United States Marine Corps. Sincerely yours, C.B. Cates, General, United States Marine Corps, Commandant of the Marine Corps. The other one from the President of the United States, who takes pleasure in presenting the Distinguished Flying Cross to Staff Sergeant Alexander Manuele, United States Marine Corps Reserve, for service as set forth in the following. Citation: for heroism and extraordinary achievement in aerial flight while serving as Navigator Bombardier of a bomber plane and Marine Bomber Squadron 611 during operations against enemy Japanese forces in the Philippine Islands area from 9 to 16 May 1945. Completing his 20th mission during this period, Staff Sergeant Manuele rendered valuable assistance to his pilot and contributed materially to the success of his plane in the infliction of damage on the enemy. His courage and devotion to duty in the face of hostile anti-aircraft fire were in keeping with the highest traditions of the United States Naval Service. For the President, signed Francis P. Matthews, Secretary of the Navy. Now, each one of these are repetitions of the Air Medal citation. So there's no point to read that.
Very nice. Did you stay in contact with anyone that you served with?
There were 2 people that I stayed in contact with, only periodically, not very much. I hadn't had contact just within the last 6 months between 2 people that I was quite close to. But again, you see, we're all in our 80s and we don't travel much, and we live our lives.
Mm-hmm. Have you attended any reunions at all?
I didn't attend reunions because they always happen to be at the wrong time, in the wrong place.
Okay. Do you belong to any veterans organizations at
I
all?
belong to the American Legion.
Okay. And one last question. How do you think your time in the service changed or affected your life?
Thanks to the President of the United States and the Congress of the United States who set up the GI Bill Had it not been for my service in the United States, I would probably be working as a common laborer or someplace. Because except for that, you say I was able to go to college.
Okay, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Yes, if you want me to digress just way back.
Sure.
I have another discharge, in addition to my Marine Corps discharge. When I was 16, I belonged to a small musical group of 4 people. 3 of whom were in the National Guard. And they said, "Why don't you join the National Guard?" And I said, "I'm only 16. They said, "Well, Colonel Hopkins wouldn't know that." Because they used to have little get-togethers there, you know, and they said, "Yes, we play." It was a little band that we got paid for. So I went to see Colonel Hopkins, and he said, all these various questions. He said, "Yeah, I guess it's all right as long as you're with these other 3 people." And so went to an encampment in DeKalb Junction, up in the wilds of New York that summer. And then that National Guard was federalized. They were going to Tuscumbia, Alabama. They were going to empty out the armory. I said, "Wow, I'm going to Alabama." Next thing you know, a phone call comes from the school. "Hey, that kid is only 16. They called me in, and I have a copy of that, of my discharge. Said the enlistment June 1940, discharge September 1940.
Now, were you with this armory right over here?
Armory right over here,
Wow.
sure.
What instrument did you play?
I played most string instruments, violin, mandolin, banjo. And it was a fun group, but we got paid.
Very interesting. All right. Well, thank you so much for your interview.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Do you have something else?
Well, his book,
Oh.
Squadron.
Oh, okay.
His pictures
Oh,
in
yeah.
there too, Navigator Bombardier.
One of my fellow navigators named Ray Perry, who was one of the people who saved everything he ever known, and his picture is right here. He wrote an actual history of our bomber group, and he had it published, self-published.
Uh-huh.
And the bombings of Magzam.
Now, is that fellow still living?
He still lives in Florida. Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Now we're giving this to Carol, right?
Proud of that.
Yeah. This is Alex Manuel, December 1945.
Okay. All right. Thank you again.